Maintaining a military presence in Mali. France signs a defense deal as part of a wider operation spanning Africa's Sahel region. Is this the start of a new era of cooperation or a gesture to lessen the pain of its colonial conscience? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Mike Hanna. France has signed a new defence treaty with Mali set to ensure long-term military ties with its former colony. Last year, French forces came to the aid of Malian soldiers under attack from al-Qaeda-linked fighters and Tuareg rebels in the nation's north. The Tuareg rebels are now holding peace talks with Mali's government. But underscoring how France views the wider threat from hardline fighters, it has broadened its military presence across the Sahel region of northern Africa, working with Mali and also Mauritania, Burkina Faso and Chad. To our guests in a moment, after Niamh Barker in Paris helps get our discussion going.
The signing of a new military deal with Mali brings French operations in Africa into a new phase. Last year, France launched Operation Serval in Mali in response to a radical insurgency in the country's north. After 18 months of fighting, its mission accomplished.
L'opération Serval a réussi.
Operation Serval was a success. This country's sovereignty has been threatened since January 2013. The French operation has allowed Mali to recover its freedom and its integrity.
Now France has its sights trained on a much larger challenge across a much wider territory. Operation Barkhane will see forces deployed across the expansive Sahel-Sahara region, and will bring together troops from France and 5 African countries: Mauritania, Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso and Chad. France is increasing its military presence from 2,500 to 3,000 troops. 1,000 soldiers will stay in Mali and the rest will be deployed across the Sahel. These are French forces training for earlier deployments. The latest operation will employ drones, helicopters and fighter jets. But faced with an elusive enemy, experts say the battle won't be easy.
It's very, very risky. There will be a lot of French troops killed. It will be a very, very long combat, a very, very long fight, with France risking to stay over for decades.
The longer that France stays in the region, the greater the risk of retaliatory attacks here on French soil. Police say they've already increased their presence at places like the Eiffel Tower. Security in Africa means security here in France. Niamh Barker, Al Jazeera, Paris.
Time now to bring in our guests. In Paris, Marie-Roger Bilway, an African affairs analyst and editor of Africa International magazine. Joining us from Berlin is Bas Lecoq, a professor of African history at the University of Ghent in Belgium and author of the book Disputed Desert Decolonization, Competing Nationalisms and Tuareg Rebellions in Northern Mali. And in Turin, we have Alessandra Giuffrida, an anthropologist specializing in northern Mali and a Tuareg political analyst. Welcome to you all. Let's begin in Paris with Marie-Roger Bilway. France is signaling now that it will maintain its military presence, not just in Mali, but throughout the region, the greater region. What is your response to this?
Yes, I think the question of military intervention has been a long-standing issue in Africa, and there has been a change now because there is sort of a national or African support, and only in the past 8 months or so, France has held 2 African summit on the security and peace issues in Paris, including major head of states. So it's France is very much committed in security issues in the former colonies. And I think they have been concerned with acting before it is too late. You know, the situation has been deteriorating in Mali for years. And, you know, things with jihad on all the groups and the Tuaregs, everything intertwined, have been growing and not having a real solution. And at the end of the day, you had the country, the northern part of the countries, had become, I would say, beacon for jihadists coming into the place and even trying to take over the whole country. So if France had not reacted promptly, I mean, the situation would be much worse today, and Mali would have lost its national sovereignty. So the change is that the military interventions we see now are called upon by the head of state, by the I would say by the African leaders, and to help them deal with very complicated situations, which are not, which are now threatening to go over the border, and it's not like, and the difference, why you have more acceptation by African people, African citizens, is that those interventions doesn't seem to come to help maintain dictators or head of state people don't want to have.
Well, I want to go. Apologies for interrupting you, Marie-Roger, but I just want to go to Alessandra Giuffrida on this particular issue. We heard Marie-Roger referring there to French intervention in Mali, requested by the government of Mali, and perhaps as preserving sovereignty, as she stated. Yet, what we're looking at now is a far wider French operation, which includes other countries within the region and not Mali itself. How do you view this military spreading of influence?
Well, I think one has to be clear about the, on one hand, the structure of these terrorist groups, which, of course, move across borders of different countries in a whole region that is extremely difficult to control, on one hand. On the other hand, I think we can see France in some ways trying to replay its old colonial strategy of divide and rule, where it's actually setting one group against the other. And when I say one group against the other, I mean terrorist groups, secular Tuareg rebel groups, and other non-Tuareg groups that have joined forces with this independentist movement, as well as the Malian army. What I think is very disquieting is the way in which this colonial strategy is being reproduced to, from my point of view, get an advantage over the situation. And what is even more worrying, in my view, is the fact that there is very little good intelligence work being carried out. If we think that these, for example, Bel Mokhtar has been running around the desert for all these years, and there are drones taking remote intelligence information, how come he has not been caught yet? With all the MINUSMA forces, with all the American forces, with all the French forces on the ground, there is something really difficult to rationally explain from my point of view. Also, I'd like to mention something that I think is worth considering. I cannot check this source, but a couple of weeks ago I received a phone from Bamako from a custom inspector who said, we're really, really worried because now there are Bambara soldiers from the Malian army joining ranks with the Mujao, which is one of the branches of al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb. And if this is the case, there may be some sort of a complicity between some fringes of the Malian army and some terrorist groups on the ground.
Well,
and
this is something that we will continue to explore, if we may, Alessandra. But I just want to go on to Baz Lecoq at this particular moment. I will get back to that point that you made, Alessandra. But Baz Lecoq, let's just cut through this. Is the French operations within Africa, in terms of aiding and assisting those countries, or is there a large degree of self-interest here, a kind of neo-colonial attitude and an intent on maintaining a strategic position in the continent? How do you view it?
Well, I think it's a bit of both. It is by aiding these countries maintaining French interests alive. And that is in itself nothing new. There's not much new in this military agreement that has just been signed. If you look at it historically, this new agreement replaces simply an older agreement signed in 1985 between the Malian government and the French government, which in itself replaces another military agreement between the Malian government and the French government signed in 1977. If you also take into account that France in the past 54 years, so ever since formal independence of its African colonies, has intervened militarily, as Marie already pointed out, about 50 times. So on average almost once a year in its African colonies. You could say that this is part of a sequence of military interventions that tries to maintain French interests. But it doesn't mean that these French interests do not coincide with local interests, especially from local governments. Whether these are former military dictators, as you saw in a number of other countries, but still also, for example, in Chad, where President Idriss Déby Itno has come to power in, let's say, less than democratic ways. In Mali, of course, it's a more democratically elected government, but whether it's military dictators or democratic governments, they can both be in line with French interests.
Well, we heard mention there of the peace talks that are happening at the moment. They have started between the Malian government and Tuareg and other rebel groups. They're being held in Algeria, focusing on greater autonomy in the north rather than separatist ambitions. Mali's borders were largely defined by France, which governed the country, as we heard, until independence in 1960. The northern border was drawn right through the Saharan caravan routes, which the Tuareg nomadic community had worked for centuries. The group launched several rebellions after Mali's independence. It signed 2 peace deals with the government in 1995 and 2006. On both occasions, the Tuaregs were promised greater autonomy for their northern region, but leaders say those promises were not fulfilled. After the Libyan uprising in 2011, large numbers of heavily armed Tuaregs who fought for former Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi returned home, reviving demands for an independent Tuareg state. Well, Marie-Roger Bilway, this is the background of what is happening at the moment. The peace talks happening in Algiers, France announcing an expansion of its military operations. What role and what is happening with these separatist movements within Mali itself? France is somewhat ambivalent on this particular position, given its relationship with some of these rebel groups in the past, is it not?
Yes, definitely. The Malian government has been complaining over the attitude of France, which seems very ambiguous towards the Tuareg groups. What the Malian government wants is to reclaim full sovereignty over the country. They don't want part of the country to go over Tuareg rule, or they don't believe the Tuareg should have a special status in the country. But what we have been seeing is that the French being there, the Serval operation, is sort of helping the Tuareg remain sort of a force against the government, and not trying to weaken them or push them into reddition. We have not seen that, and the Malians don't want that. I just wanted to say something about the interests coinciding with the French interests coinciding with Malian interests. This is a very interesting point. You know, people have been very ambiguous when it comes to judge military intervention. They are like, well, this is colonialism or neo-colonialism. But if you don't have those intervention from powerful countries who can really make a difference, like France, people are not happy either. So you see in Syria, for instance, everybody want the international community to do something to stop the massacres, the bloodshed.
Well,
but it doesn't
if I
happen.
may, Marie-Roger, it's a very strong point, I think, and I'd like to put it to Baz Lecoq. We heard their mention of comparisons with Syria. We've seen in Iraq, for example, the call for some kind of outside intervention. This appears to be a pattern in the post-colonial area. Is certain countries, certain nations actually seeking, in some cases, help from their formal colonial controllers to deal with current situations within their region. Is this a pattern, Baz Lecoq?
Well, I don't know if you can really call it a pattern of demand for assistance and then getting it in dealing with inside problems in the way that Marie described it. I must admit, in the case of Mali, yes, indeed, the Malian government did ask the French government formally to intervene in the north of the country in 2012, and then we saw intervention with Opération Serval starting 2013. But Marie also has a point when she says that the French military presence had done nothing so far to weaken the position of a number of separatist or independentist nationalist movements in the north, like the MLA or the MAA. And this is much to the dislike of the Malian government, which had clearly hoped that the French would not only go after various al-Qaeda affiliated movements, but also after these Tuareg movements, which did not happen. So interests converge sometimes, but sometimes they don't. And then the question comes, whose interest goes first, the French or the Malian?
Well, let's put that question to Alessandra Giuffrida. And whose interests come first here? We know the relationship that France had in the past with groups like the MLA. We're hearing allegations that it is not working that hard at competing against them. It is focusing, it says, in activities of the Islamist groups who aren't talking about separation or nation in any form whatsoever. Whose interests are being looked after by the French and their military presence?
I don't see how we can just give one answer. Certainly the focus on France is hiding a large number of other actors who are very active in the area and are never mentioned in any program, but they are there. For example, China. And I think these other actors are all contributing to orchestrate the destabilization of the area so that they can exert colonial interests. France is the oldest actor in the area, and I think that by trying to set the Tuareg against the terrorists against the Malian army, is just trying to retain its presence in the region, just like in the old days when before colonial independence, France wanted to create a protectorate to maintain control over Algerian oil in the region. And to do that, it had co-opted Tuareg leaders and chiefs by promising, schools and hospitals. And we've seen that, unfortunately, the promise was never kept, and that these days the Tuareg have completely fragmented, and some of them, I think, are more or less in the position of not knowing where they're from, even, and are therefore easily caught into all sorts of different military operations. I think also there is a mistake in trying to portray France as the only interlocutor of the Tuareg and the Tuareg as a united front. There are an enormous number of different groups within the Tuareg themselves and other ethnic groups in the region, and also foreign militias that are in the area, and these cannot be ignored. The interest, therefore, that France, in my view, is trying to maintain in the region, in the overall region, through its military presence, it's on one hand, the opportunity of continuing to be an economic actor alongside with China and Qatar and other countries that are operating in the region, with projects of land concessions and mineral research. Now, we cannot ignore this reality. And therefore, in a nutshell, I think France is there not just for colonial reasons. It's using a colonial strategy, but to protect its economic interests.
Well, let's go to Marie-Roger Bilway with that particular point. Are we looking at a new strategy emerging here, which may not necessarily be to the detriment of the region, but certainly is in a self-interest of an outside player? As we've heard pointed out, there are so many players in what is happening in northern Mali or the wider region as a whole. Is this something new that is developing a new form, a kind of post-colonial process that uses the tools of colonialization to actually operate and continue to maintain economic interests and strategic interests?
You know, the real situation is that France doesn't need to do that to maintain or to pursue its interests in Africa. Mali is very much dependent on France in many ways. Niger also, and you know, the situation born out of the colonization has been lingering on, and France's interests are, I would say, are very present anyway. And the talks have been that maybe France is now neglecting Africa, or taking Africa for granted, and they are not doing much to help develop those countries. That was the current talk, and not that France is coming very much into acting and doing things. It's not true. So I don't want to defend France so much, but what I want to say is that I don't mind if France if France has this particular interest to defend. What I see is that African countries need that help. I don't see the Malian government, which is entangled in a very complicated situation, internally, for sure, but also with international ramification. I don't see this government today being able to deal with the situation. You know what? When they felt too much pride, they were like, why do we let those little guys in the north there, this Tuareg, bother us so much? We should do something. They sent the army there, and you know what happened? The army those troops were slaughtered. You know, the MNLA, the Tuareg movements, and all the I would say the adversaries there are stronger than the current army.
Well, let's go. Apologies for interrupting again, Marie-Roger.
Stay on ideological situation.
But I just want to go to Baz Lecoq with a point that you're bringing up there. I just want to go to Baz Lecoq with a point that you're bringing up there. Is the permanent or semi-permanent French military presence an acknowledgement of failure of governance within a country like Mali?
Yeah, I don't think so. I would first, before I answer that, come back to the point that Marie just made, that France doesn't really have an interest in Mali or in other countries in West Africa, and is acting at the benefit of these countries that are not able to sort out their own problems. I think that is slightly misrepresenting very strong French economic interests. Perhaps not so much in Mali itself, but in neighboring Niger. And if you think that the borders between all these countries are very porous, if not to say non-existent, in neighboring Niger, France has a number of very large interests in uranium mines. At about 500 kilometers of the northeastern part of the Malian border with Niger, it is now under construction one of the largest uranium mines on the planet, the Imouraren site, which, when it is fully active, will be the second largest uranium mine on Earth. It is run by a French company, which is partly state-owned at least, and if you then think that France is largely dependent on nuclear energy for its energy resources in the country, for its electricity, then stating that France is doing all of this just for the good of African governments, I find it slightly overstated.
Well, this is an argument that is going to maintain. Apologies, Baz Lecoq. We've come to an end of this particular discussion. My thanks to our guests, Marie-Roger Bilway in Paris, Baz Lecoq in Berlin, and Alexandra Jeffrida in Turin. And please let us know your thoughts. You can leave your comments on facebook.com/AJ Inside Story or go to @AJ Inside Story on Twitter. I'm Mike Hanna. Thanks for watching. Goodbye for now.